The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
We're all familiar with the three whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burrish is here to help.
Fostering deeper relationships, influencing behavior change, developing resilience. You're about to start winning. Here is your host, Christine Bright.
Welcome to Parenting Game. I am so glad you are here. This episode, this one's for the dads. I have Donald Bialkowski, who is the founder of Aligned on Purpose Coaching, who's going to share with us today how the culture can really impact how dads parent. Donald, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so share with us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter who is a total enigma to me, challenges me every day. And I have an 11-year-old who identifies as non-binary, so that also challenges me a lot. We have lots of conversations in our house about what it means to be a boy and a girl and anything in between. So those are my two kids, and I've been married for 17 years now. So.
Oh, wow. Congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So you are coaching, and you mainly focus on helping men. And, I enjoyed getting onto your website and just seeing all the different ways that you really want to help men, not only with the mental health, physical health, just with past, issues that they may need to resolve. But share a little bit about your background. I know you were involved with the VA, you had your own personal journey, and now, you've come into this other career of being a coach. So go ahead and start and fill us in on how you got there.
Sure, yeah, wow, it's been a journey, that's for sure. Well, a little bit, I'm a psychotherapist. I've been in behavioral health for the last 20 years in different roles, in different settings. I've been in correctional settings and community mental health, and as you referenced, I was at the VA hospital for the last 10 years before going out on my own and pursuing my own private practice. So that's kind of my professional development. So a little bit more about me, it's a little personal, but I come from a single family home. I'm the youngest of three boys, and in my home there was a lot of depression and alcoholism. And so I brought that into my early adulthood. And then when I went back to graduate school and pursued my professional development, my life kind of separated in two ways. I had this kind of like professional trajectory, and then I had this other part of my life that was still trying to manage my depression, and I kind of developed sort of a sophisticated balance of substance use and just a kind of, my life had really kind of separated. And then with the pandemic, things fell apart for me, and I fell into a significant depression, and my marriage was on life support, barely. But it was really the best thing that happened to me because it really sort of opened my eyes to a lot of my own issues, but then also got me onto this idea about what it means to be a man today and some of the challenges that we face. So that really kind of lit a fire under me to really start talking about and exploring what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be masculine in 2022, and what kind of challenges does that face. So that's really been the conversation that I've been having with men, and this kind of work that part of the work that I do in coaching, and just trying to help men be better versions of themselves.
I love what you do, and what I like about coaching, becoming more commonplace and gaining momentum is men really struggle with reaching out. Women, we tend to do that a little bit better. I do know some women who do, struggle that, so it isn't just cut and dry. And to have safe places, for men to be able to either one, be vulnerable, or even learn how to be vulnerable better. Is hard. And one thing that I, talk about a lot, I love advocating for dads, for men, because I just have a personal feel that it's been minimized a lot over the years, and that when I think there's in this masculinity that men feel if you're vulnerable that you're undermining yourself. And what they do when they open up, and and I've had the pleasure of coaching some single dads, is they realize that that does not undermine them. If anything, it just bolsters a stronger relationship with their kids. So I love what you do. And you have so many ways that you can come at men and help them. I shouldn't say come at men. That sounds a little scary.
How about meet them where they're at?
Meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And we're going to get in, to a lot of that. But initially, when we were talking, what really caught my attention was the stats that you shared overall. So I'd like to begin our conversation with some of those stats about just men's health. In general, the mental health piece. Yeah. So when we compare men to women, it's clear that men aren't doing very well from a health perspective. So here in the United States, we die about 5 years earlier than women do, and it's 7 years earlier worldwide. We live pretty unhealthy lifestyles. So we're 3 times as likely to be dependent on substances. We're more violent. We are responsible for 90% of the homicides in this country. We're also 80% of the homicide victims. 80% of suicides are men as well. So the numbers are pretty staggering. They're pretty clearly in favor of men. And another thing that's really interesting and I think plays a big role in this is loneliness. And men are really, I think it's like 2 out of 10 men don't even have a close friend, like none whatsoever. And of the men that do have close relationships, only 50% of those men actually talk about their problems, which is a problem because life is a big problem. It's really hard, and we really can't do it alone. It's hard. We're too close to ourselves, and it's hard to do that. So if you don't have anybody else to kind of go to get that support and problem solve and resource yourself, you become an island and you become really alone. And we know loneliness is a really significant contributing factor to poor outcomes. So mental health outcomes, depression, and then suicide, of course. A lot of mental health issues related to loneliness, but also physical health issues. So loneliness is a contributing factor to like cardiovascular disease and heart stroke. It's as powerful as like obesity and smoking and high blood pressure for those kinds of. So it really has a lot of impact on all of our health. Well, the one stat that really stuck out to me is this one from Harvard study. So this is the good news.
Yeah.
So share with us that stat.
Yeah, so Harvard, they're known as the Harvard Gluic studies, but Harvard followed a group of men for 80 years, and they looked at all kind of variables between these men. But the number one variable that was related to longevity was relationships and social relationships. So the men in the study that had close relationships lived 22% longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown.
Yes, yeah.
I am a big fan of hers.
Me
but,
too.
And she was one of those, as we said, this isn't just like cut and dried men and women, women make friends easier than men type of a thing. And she was one of those women who were more to that side of didn't have strong relationships, wasn't very vulnerable. And then that kind of got all blown apart for her. And now her research is all on the importance of vulnerability, and how she just continually talks about we are created for connection. It's not a guy-girl thing. It's a human thing.
Yeah, for sure.
We're created for connection. I think we see that all the time too. where the disconnect happens, and we're going to dig into that a little bit, but we know with infants, right? They need that closeness and stuff, and there's been those studies where they've had infants and the mother's just sitting there, not doing any, and you just see, and they've done it with little, infant boys, infant girls, and the reaction's the same. So we know that, but somewhere from between infancy and adulthood, there becomes this disconnect and this other learning, and it starts seeming to miss a little bit when it comes to the guys.
Yeah.
So in American culture, we know that, overall it's just like, guys are the tough, they suck it up, they're the strong one, they aren't emotional, and we're finding out that that's not good. And you shared with me this concept of a man box. So share a little bit more about where you learned that from and what that concept is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's some research that shows that period of strong attachment that kind of separates around, kindergarten, like 5-6 years of age, something like that, where men start to get socialized differently than girls do. And so, I really look to, I don't think you can talk about men's health without talking about culture and how men get socialized. And so I look to the work by Paul Kivel, who was a activist and a writer doing some men's work in Oakland, California in the 1980s. And he coined the term man box, which is just, again, it's a way to talk about how men get socialized. And the characteristics that he saw in the work that he was doing was that this man box is really characterized by like dominance and power and control and fearlessness and stoicism, or like a lack of emotionality. And then also like competitiveness and victory. And so that's kind of the framework that little boys get socialized into in this culture. So.
And then share with me, and I don't know, do you know what it was that kind of triggered him to start studying this and seeing what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, at the time it was really looking at kind of like social justice issues and kind of looking at dimensions of diversity and power differentials, and just sort of, that was kind of his direction. And out of that research just came this sort of like unique, like men, just like any other population, whether it's women or people of color or trans-identified people, like men have their own unique needs and preferences as well. And so, that was really, I think, the power of his work was to kind of elevate that this group too has unique considerations, and he started talking about it.
So share with us a little bit what you've seen, how this impacts how a man parents when he's, been socialized that this is what a man needs to be.
Yeah. Well, I think it really sets us up to fail. I mean, that's been my personal experience, but it's my experience professionally as well. I mean, if you think about the man box kind of like a toolbox, those things like power and dominance and control, like those things aren't necessarily bad, but they're just limiting, so it's like the metaphor would be like if I were to be asked to build a house from the ground up and I was given this box and I only had like carpentry tools, I'm going to run into trouble when I need to start like doing electrical work and plumbing work. And so it's sort of similar. Men get handed this toolbox, but it's really limited. It doesn't include things like care and compassion and courage, which is sort of an extension of vulnerability, but that maybe is another conversation. So we're given this toolbox that's really limited. It's kind of like we're kindergartners trying to do long division, because parenting is hard. We could just take vulnerability, for example. Vulnerability is just, uncertainty. It's a state of uncertainty. Well, parenting is all uncertainty, And so if we don't have that tool in our toolbox, it leads to frustration. I know for me, it either comes out in anger because I'm frustrated, or it just comes out in disconnection, and I just kind of check out. And so, those things, both those things are not the kind of dad that I want to be. So it creates a real challenge for us.
Yeah. So I'm gonna take us. I'm gonna say off script a little bit because you hit on it, and this is something that I have spoken to often. And I'll be quite honest, when there are men in the audience, it's always a really big aha. So I'm gonna have you put more of your therapeutic hat on. But I do a lot of teaching about the anger iceberg. because it's just like, I'm just angry, I'm just angry, I'm just angry. And as you and I know, you're not just angry.
Yep.
There's a lot more going on underneath the surface of that. And that's why they call it an iceberg, because like you see the tip, you see the anger, but then there's all this other stuff that could be going on underneath. And when we take the time to figure that out in ourselves, or to be able to ask questions to figure it out in somebody else, it's really a great way to connect. It's hard, right? Because you want to avoid being angry. Can you just share with me a little bit about, maybe your own work in that and recognizing anger, maybe some of the work that you do with the men that you work with, of just not saying, I'm just angry?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think it's a big issue. I deal a lot with anger. It's a real common issue that men have to face, again, because some of our experience falls outside of this box, and so so I talk about anger like anger is a secondary emotion, and I use the acronym GIFs when I'm talking about anger. So GIFs, G stands for guilt, and then I is inferiority, and then F is fear, and then T is trauma or some hurt, and then S is shame. So underneath anger is usually one of those emotions. And so for men, a lot of times it's just having that conversation. So it's recognizing anger and then exploring really like what's underneath that. Because again, men are kind of socialized to have like mad, sad, or glad. Those are kind of like the emotions that we're given. So as we do what I call emotional integrity work, is really identifying what our emotions are and then learning how to communicate them, it changes everything. Because if you're dealing with anger, you're having a conversation about anger, it's not really anger. So it's not until you really name what it is. Let's say it's feelings of guilt. You did something that you're not proud of. Once you can identify the guilt, then you can have a productive conversation about how to respond to that and how to move through that. Where without that kind of language or without that awareness, then it's just a fight. It's just a conflict, and that doesn't really do anybody any good. So.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into, I was going to save this towards the end, but we're kind of on the flow with it now. So when we were initially talking, we both use an emotional color, I call it the emotional color wheel, but an emotional wheel within our coaching practice. Share a little bit about what it is and how you use it in your practice.
So it's emotional integrity, which is just the ability to identify and communicate your emotions honestly. And this is really foreign territory for a lot of men, because we're sort of socialized to have a pretty small emotional vocabulary. So I like to use a feelings wheel, and they're really common. You can find them online anywhere. But they just really kind of break down in the center as sort of your primary emotions, like mad, sad, and glad, and then it goes into secondary, and then like even another ring of emotions. And so it's kind of like learning a new language. It's like learning vocabulary. I say a lot of guys that I work with, it's like learning Russian. It just takes time. How I use it is usually with a form, and there's apps that you can use as well. But it's just kind of like throughout the day, just sort of like checking in, like what am I feeling at this moment? And as you do that with repetition, you learn that vocabulary, and you're able to sort of like, you're able to speak to that a little bit more. I had a guy that I was working with last week. We just started, and he brought back his homework. He had done it, and he had two emotions. It was power and powerlessness. Those were his emotions. And then the next week he came back, and he was like, I can't believe it. He's like, I can't believe how many emotions I feel in a day. And it's really empowering, because now he has the ability to, kind of ask for what he needs, or when it comes to parenting, to be able to kind of navigate some of the challenging situations that parenting and relationships bring up. So
well, and you hit it on the head. It's it's building that vocabulary, and I work with kids too, and I wasn't sure how it would work. So I have one kiddo that I've worked with for a long time, and we have a really good rapport. So I thought, I'm going to just bring it out and try it. So he has dysgraphia. He's on the spectrum. Dysgraphia is a thing, struggle with handwriting. And I knew it's the only way to make it better is to practice. There's no real set therapies on it. It's just practicing. But we kept hitting a wall. So I thought, I'm gonna try it. and we walked our way out. And of course, I had ideas on what I thought the emotion would be, but when we walked our way out, what he landed on is embarrassment. Mm-hmm. And once he could name it, and then I just said, so how are we gonna handle that? And he goes, I'm just gonna have to keep practicing. And after that, he still, it's not his favorite, but it's not as much of a struggle.
Tough.
Yeah. And then, then we go the other way too, and look at those positive emotions and like, how do you want to feel about it? Well, his was, I want to feel confident. So that just reinforced, this idea of, practicing. And when men can learn to name their emotions better and deal with them, what a gift to their kids. Right? Yep. Because, as kids, you're always trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, isn't that most of what we bring to our therapists is figuring out the anger that we received as a kid?
Absolutely.
But, I mean, you can help minimize that and actually be very therapeutic to your kids when you yourself know words and know better language and how to express it. So I probably just took the wind out of your because I wanted to ask you about the impact with that on on parenting. But you and I kind of do the end up kind of in the same places when we're coaching people. So share with us some more, like as far as tools that you use, for one, just tools that you use with men and that you share with them. And then if you can, just weave it in a little bit more of how you have seen this either in your life or in their lives, help them parent better.
Yeah. Well, I love what you just said. It's a great example of like kind of the empowerment that happens when you're able to sort of like recognize what's actually happening. I had one of my mentors said to me once that emotions run everything, and I think that's true, and so to be able to like recognize them, I had just the other day, my youngest keeps their room in a way that is not acceptable to me. And so, my initial reaction is just, I'm angry, I'm upset, it's out of my control, I wanted to look a particular way. And so without like recognizing that I was frustrated, I just yell and scream, and that actually really doesn't do anything. It doesn't help the situation. It's not going to motivate them to clean their room. And I don't feel very good about myself either, so it's kind of a lose-lose situation. But by being able to recognize myself, so this is a skill, it's an I statement, it's like, it's a great communication tool. So it's just simply I feel and then I need. So I said, I feel really frustrated and I need a break, and I was able to walk away from that situation. And then they had the space to kind of like let that set in. Like they know I'm upset. And so they started cleaning their room, and so actually got the outcome that I really wanted by just recognizing how I was feeling and taking a break essentially. Where if I'm not aware of that, I'm just screaming and yelling, and they just lock down, and then we're just butting heads.
I'm so glad you shared that. I'm like ready to come out of my seat because I share that with parents all the time. Yeah. I said ambiguity is really your friend. As a parent, we feel like we need to problem solve in the moment every time, but being ambiguous, not manipulatively. But doing the I take a break really freaks the kids out.
Yeah.
It does. And they're like, whoa, I don't know what to do. Like, I can handle the yelling. I know how to do that. But to do this moment, and like you said, a lot of times it allows them the space, the process, and you don't have to go, any further. So I love that you shared that example. I'm going to figure out a way to pull that out.
It's a practice.
And be able to share it that, it really does work. Yeah. So share some other ways that you help the guys.
Yeah, so communication, that's one of my favorite communication tools, I statements. We talked about emotional integrity. I just think that is such an important piece, is really developing that vocabulary. I also use mindfulness a lot. Mindfulness is, I think, a really important tool. So there's a lot of mindfulness out there. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what mindfulness is. But
can you?
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you and
Sure.
have you share because I'll have to say this was a work of mine. Like in the mind, I was like thinking crystals and candle. I'm like,
Yes.
ugh,
Yeah.
like so not into it.
Yeah.
And I have to say now I'm a fan.
Uh-huh.
So I think it would be very helpful for you to define and share what you do with the mindfulness piece.
Well, yeah, just so mindfulness is kind of tricky to define, but it's synonymous with awareness. So mindfulness is just awareness of the present moment non-judgmentally. So it's a capacity that we have. It's a way of paying attention. It's totally human. It's not, Buddhist or woo-woo or spiritual
You don't have to
necessarily.
have a crystal in one
You
hand
don't
and
have
a
to do
candle
that.
in the other.
That's right.
Okay.
You're actually mindful a lot of the time already. It's just present moment, non-judgmental awareness. But why this is so important is because it allows us to then begin to use our minds for the wonderful tools that they are instead of them using us as a tool. So your mind is constantly on and is constantly it's pretty judgmental. It's not like non-judgmental. So that's an important piece to mindfulness. But your mind is constantly running, I want this or this, I prefer this, and it's sort of this narrative, and it really drives how we behave. And so when we can be aware, this is like the source of personal empowerment, is interrupting your mind and recognizing that's just being present. And once you do that, then you can use your mind, as the wonderful tool that it is. So yeah, that's a practice as well. It's something that, so I teach men how to do mindfulness. There's different practices, just like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and you do bicep curls for 6 weeks, at the end of 6 weeks, you'll have a more defined bicep. And mindfulness is kind of strengthening that muscle of the mind to be present in a non-judgmental way. So you can do that in different ways, but meditation is one way that we do that. And so if you do that for 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, you're going to have a stronger ability to be present.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I see that so often is where, a lot of the, tantruming and transition issues, you're so busy. You have this family scheduled so tight that you don't have the opportunity to problem solve when there's a meltdown going on.
Yeah.
You don't have the opportunity to just take a minute and say, is this really my child or is this me, in the moment?
Yeah.
So I love that that's part of what you work on. There is so much more we could go into.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have you back. I just appreciate everything that you shared and your vulnerability and sharing your story. But before we go, share your website.
Yeah, so I'm at onpurposementoring.com.
All right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for watching The Parenting Game, and we look forward to seeing you again.
We're all familiar with the 3 whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaut, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaut, Country Financial will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burish is here to help.
Thank you for watching The Parenting Game. All episodes of The Parenting Game are available on demand at sunprairiemediacenter.com.